Play more removal is a lie, and it's a lie that can be damaging to your deck building. Here's why. I ran a poll on socials asking what your biggest deck building weakness is, and a lot of people said removal and interaction. Mostly that they didn't know how much of it to actually run in their decks. And that's because this feeling that the community at large has instilled on us is that if we don't like a card in play, we should always have an answer for it. But that's hurting you more than it's hurting someone else. Removal is an important part of every deck, 1000%. But you have to consider 3 things before you cave to the run more removal crowd. 1. What are you removing? 2. When are you casting your removal? And 3. What is it costing you? We've all been in games where an opponent is windmilling some kind of removal before you've even finished announcing what spell you're casting. Something so vitriolic and toxic that they couldn't bear it touch the battlefield, right? Something that must have been an instant infinite combo and won the game, right? Something that must have prevented everyone else from playing the game and hard locked the board, right? Well, no, chances are it was something relatively mundane, and that player just had removal in hand and mana up and wanted to use it. But that same player is going to lose the game because they just used their precious removal because they could rather than because they needed to. And that is the first lie to removal. You actually don't need to remove everything. Removal is best used tactically, a sniper's bullet rather than a hand grenade. If you're bolting the bird, then maybe later you can't remove the next player's Drannith Magistrate. You've used up precious resources on something inconsequential for the meme, or because you had a bad experience with a card in a previous game, instead of what is actually going to make the game worse overall to play. You also have 3 other players at the table that are going to aid in sore spots too. If you've packed your deck with answers, then guess where everyone else's removal will be pointed? At your board. I previously asked on socials why Sire of Stagnation here isn't seen more often in Commander, and the response was both 6 mana is too slow and it's easily removed. And, that left me puzzled. If you're removing a 6 mana creature that doesn't win me the game, rather than the thing that it lets me draw that will win me the game, excellent, I've won in that exchange. I've drawn out your removal and you wasted it on something that you're afraid will exile a few cards? Draw me a couple cards? You've wasted that removal spell. So instead of running a volume of removal, instead try and cast your removal strategically, pointedly. That way you don't have to run more, you just have to be wiser about using it. The next important point is that removal, in a 4-player game, is often negative tempo. Mana you're using to cast spells on other people's turn is mana that you aren't using to advance your own board state. Take board wipes as a prime example of this. Most of them are sorcery speed, taking your turn to cast something that costs between 4 and 6 mana and often sets you just as far back as it does everyone else. But then you're passing the turn, so everyone else gets to rebuild while you sit defenseless to whatever massive bombs or potentially game-winning effects opponents may be able to run out, completely unhindered. We have all had games where a board wipe has paved the way for a different player to win the game outright, because we weren't thoughtful about when we were casting it. Removal should fit into our mana curve, meaning it should be a gap filler. It should be at mana values that complement and contrast our mana curve. If the average mana value of your deck is 3 mana, then with 4 mana available, you can reliably cast the majority of your deck and keep 1 mana up for a 1 mana removal, like Swords to Plowshares or Swansong. The further the game goes on from there, the higher mana value removal you can reliably run that doesn't hinder your game plan. It allows you to advance your own board state while also occasionally dealing with game-defining threats. Board wipes are trickier. Since you aren't the first person to rebuild, you're the last, which is why some board wipes are best used when you can also cast something after them, having the first opportunity to rebuild. Casting a Damnation is great, but it's better backed up by then putting a blocker into play to ensure you don't get blown out before being able to untap again. No one likes the guy who does nothing but cast a board wipe and pass the turn over and over and over again. And likely that player doesn't like doing it either, because their board state remains undeveloped. Let's look at high-powered Commander. There's a reason why the majority of removal run at that level of play costs 1 mana or is completely free to cast. And that's because they understand that you only really need to protect yourself when you're trying to win, or attempt to stop an opponent from trying to win. They understand that it's just as important to build up your own board, and not that everything your opponents cast needs to be answered. Let them have that Mana Crypt. Let them have that Rhystic Study. Do not let them have the satisfaction of you taking a turn off because you removed something from their board that wasn't going to win them the game anyway. That is the second lie of run more removal. It's that the more you run, the less you need to care about when you're using your removal, because you simply have access to more. But you do not need to make sure it doesn't leave you shields down, and you don't feel like you aren't able to progress your own game while trying to stop others. This is one of the biggest concerns I see when players show me their decks. They don't look at the cost of their removal. Mana cost is only part of that, certainly, but there's also opportunity cost. If you're holding up mana to remove something that may be an issue, you aren't developing your board. You aren't using mana wisely. For every 3 mana you leave unspent, each opponent gets to spend 3 more mana developing their board states, and that's an opportunity cost that you will never be able to catch up with. This isn't a one-on-one format. That's where it's entirely possible to deal with everything your opponent plays and still develop your board state. But this is Commander, and you simply cannot keep up with 3 opponents doing things on each of their turns. It's a cost far greater than you are ever able to pay. That is a mana cost, that is a card advantage cost, and that is a tempo cost. This is a format where people can, and will, be able to slam big, scary cards turn over turn over turn, and that's a good thing. You should not feel compelled to deal with everything at the cost of you, yourself, not being able to play big, scary cards turn over turn over turn, or pressuring the rest of the board for a win yourself. Because those cards that other people are playing are not costing you the game. If you're caving to the run more removal rhetoric, then you're cutting good cards or fun cards from your deck because you feel like you have to have a response for everything. Well, I'm here to reassure you, you don't. The highest cost of removal is your own deck. Be careful about how much you run, because that's going to eat into crucial areas of your deck, like your core conceit, your ramp, your card draw, or, God forbid, your land count. These are all aspects your deck needs to run, and if you're considering going down to 33 lands to fit in a 10th piece of removal, you and I need to have a serious talk. So instead of running more removal at the cost of other cards in your deck, or at the cost of not being able to develop your own board state, consider everything I've discussed. You aren't responsible for removing everything all the time. It's not possible to have an answer for everything. Not everything is worth removing all the time. There is a hidden cost to removal that prevents you from moving towards the game's end state. If you feel like you're not running enough removal, here's my rule of thumb. Run fewer pieces of removal, but ensure that they can deal with more threats. Versatility beats out volume every time. Generous Gift, Chaos Warp, and Beast Within. These are all good pieces of removal because they can deal with anything. And you're likely wishing you ran more removal because you were running only removal that deals with creatures. But often the biggest threats in Commander are enchantments and artifacts. Consider 3 tiers of removal. Narrow, cheap removal. Swords to Plowshares, Swansong, and Fatal Push all fall into this category. Because they're narrow, they don't answer everything. But because they're cheap, the chances are you can cast it and another spell, making them more flexible. Versatile removal. Generous Gift, Chaos Warp, and Beast Within all deal with everything, and are your best bets for holding back the unknown. If an opponent's board state is getting scary, and you think they might go for the win, holding up one of these to make sure you can deal with whatever is coming next is your best bet. If they try to take everyone out all at once, try just answering what is coming at you and let them do the dirty work of eliminating your opponents for you. Wide removal. Decimate, Farewell and Toxic Deluge are all pick and choose sculptable answers that let you decide what stays and what goes, and you can play around that. It allows you to develop your own board state without throwing it all away with a spell that destroys everything unilaterally. Being able to choose what stays or goes is powerful, and it's worth taking a turn off of developing your own board state if you can be confident that you just set 3 players back way further than you've set yourself. And honestly, only 1 to 2 pieces of removal at each of these levels can be considered for a deck. Be tactical about your removal, about when you're casting your removal, and about what the opportunity cost is, and you'll find you really don't need to run more removal. Thanks as always to my friends at Moxfield for sponsoring the channel. You can check out a link to my profile in the description, and thanks to my sponsor Face to Face Games. Be sure to use my promo code MECHANIC at checkout for 5% off of all of your orders. Be sure to check out these other videos on my channel too. Learn how card draw can help you run fewer pieces of removal, and how your land count should definitely be higher. If you learned something today, then you have to hit that subscribe button. And as always, folks, good luck and have fun.